The Second Amendment is one of the most crucial yet widely argued rights that we have as Americans. Some say that it's so old that it's outdated. It needs to be gone away with. Others argue that it's way too dangerous. Well, let's dig into it. Let's dive into the Second Amendment. Let's read the text. Let's understand what the Founding Fathers meant. We're going to dive into the Militia Act of 1792, had to look at the notes. And understand exactly how that right benefits us, what it means to us, and what could happen if that right is taken away. Let's dive into the Second Amendment on this episode of the Range Minded Podcast, episode 269, Shall Not Be Infringed. I hope you enjoy this episode. The text of the Second Amendment reads as follows, quote, "A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed." Now, a lot of folks look at the text and they say, it says militia, and that means some sort of military unit, whether it be something like the National Guard or the standing military that the United States didn't have at the time. Oh, hey, this is future editing the video, Steve. Yes, I did misspeak. I was wrong. We did have a standing army, and we were a country at the time of the Bill of Rights. I deeply apologize for what mistakes I make. I'm only human. That doesn't change the importance of this video. Let's keep listening. They feel, a lot of the anti-gunners feel that the Second Amendment only relates to a standing army. But that's not how the courts see it. In fact, we've seen a lot of great cases come out of the Supreme Court, a lot of great decisions coming from the Supreme Court to help clarify the meaning of the Bill of Rights. In the Heller decision a few years back, Supreme Court Justice Scalia helped clarify it by breaking it down to the operative clause and the prefatory clause. The prefatory clause defines a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of the free state. But the operative clause, the one that has the teeth, the one that has the argument, is the part where it mentions the right of the people to keep and bear arms. If it was just for a military unit, the Founding Fathers would have stated that it was for a military unit. No, they included the people because the people had the power. The government is not meant to have control over the people. The way the Constitution is written, it is a fence around those who we elect. It is to keep the freedom of the people and not the power to the government. This was Supreme Court Justice Scalia's quote. He said, quote, "The prefatory clause does not suggest that preserving the militia was the only reason Americans valued the ancient right. Most undoubtedly thought it would even be important for self-defense and hunting." Self-defense. In fact, I contend that hunting is the least beneficial from the Second Amendment. In the Federalist Papers, it goes into depth that it is more important for the people to keep and bear arms to fight against a government that turns into a tyrannical rule and not a republic, the way that the Constitution spelled it out for us. Or in other words, the translation is, the Second Amendment is not for duck hunting. It's not for big game hunting. It's designed to keep the people safe from some sort of tyrannical rule, which could at some point show its face on American soil. Joseph Story said this, quote, "The right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of the liberties of a republic, since it offers a strong moral check against usurpation and arbitrary power of rulers, and will generally, even if these are successful in the first instance, enable the people to resist and triumph over them." Again, even our founding fathers understood that the Second Amendment is not about hunting and is not only for military service, but is meant for everyday citizens to have a check against a government that could at some point turn into a tyrannical rule. Our founding fathers, they were pretty smart. Now, it's important to understand what is meant by arms in the Second Amendment, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Well, what is arms? Is it our two little dangly things that hang from our shoulders? No. The founding fathers did argue this. The way they understood it is completely different than what we understand it now. And that's why I wanted to dive into the Militia Act of 1792, because there's some important information there. In the Militia Act of 1792, there's this paragraph, quote, "Every free able-bodied white male citizen of respective states who is or shall be of age of 18 years shall be enrolled in the militia, and every such citizen shall provide himself with a good musket or firelock or a sufficient bayonet and belt, 2 spare flints, and a knapsack." It didn't say that the United States was going to supply these men like we have now. When you join the military, you don't take your guns, you don't take your tank, you don't take your jet fighter. No, that stuff is supplied by the government. Here, the Militia Act, every able-bodied man was required to have a firearm, was required to have a bayonet that could affix to it, was required to have the necessary munitions to keep that firearm fed. It also states at some point later on that is anything that can be used in offense or defense. Now, why would they say that? Why would they put that in there? It's not the military's job. It is the citizen's job to have arms to keep themselves safe. Yes, in this case, the militia was necessary because it was every citizen that was involved at the point. There was no standing army at the time. Yes, again, I misspoke. We did have a military. Just keep listening. Quit picking on me. When this was written, it was the citizen's job to maintain freedom. But that did not stop when the military was created. That carried forth. That amendment still is as alive today as it was written way back when our founding fathers felt it necessary to write it down on paper. And now let's take away some other stuff from what's written in the Militia Act. Okay? This was not a gun that was meant for hunting. It was a military-grade rifle. Well, at that time it was a musket. They were military-grade weapons that every citizen could purchase for themselves and keep in their homes over their fireplace if they needed. Okay, and they had the same or equivalent to whatever the military had at the time as well. Okay, that they had the same equipment. It was also a law that every male citizen have one of these arms. They had to have them by law. It was necessary. It was necessary for the security of a free state. And again, the military expected every male citizen to have the same capability as any soldier in the army. Highly necessary. Now, to those who say, well, the Second Amendment only reflects that which what the founders had at their time. It only counts for muskets. Well, that is a stupid argument to begin with. But I'm going to go to the stupid side in a second. What the founders saw fit is that every citizen had the ability to have the same level of firepower as the military did at the time. Now, I know I misspoke. I said that there was no standing army at the United States at the time. I misspoke. They did. They had an army at the time, but they still depended on the militia because they just didn't have enough people to fight against the greatest military power at the time. They couldn't be everywhere at once, where the British had a vast and well-regulated, actually, military component. So I misspoke there. Now, when they say, well, it only applies to the muskets and it only applies to arms that they had back then. So you're saying that you want to get rid of your iPhone and your iPad and your computer and only go back to passenger pigeon and pin and quill? Is that what you're saying to me? No, of course not. The founding fathers knew that people would evolve, that what we had would become better. They understood that. These were highly intelligent people. They weren't just willy-nilly idiots that come across the pond. They understood that civilization would evolve. And the Constitution really is a document that is made to encompass any new technology at the time. Not to mention, these guys didn't just have muskets, not just these single-fire rifles that took, you could maybe pop off 2 rounds in a minute. No, I want you to look at something like the duck-foot pistol or maybe the puckle gun, and then you might change your mind. Also, there was air rifles that had 23 rounds, 25 rounds capable. Pretty ingenious stuff. There's a lot more stuff. If you want to say that it only counts for arms that they had then, well, the puckle gun was very near to the Gatling gun. So does that mean I have a Gatling that I can consider a free arm? Side note, the NFA needs to be repealed because it's unconstitutional.
Hell yes.
Another thinking man of the time said this in a debate of the Militia Act in 1790. His name is Roger Sherman. He said this: conceived it to be the privilege of every citizen and one of his most essential rights to bear arms, and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made. The particular states, like private citizens, have the right to be armed, and to defend by force of arms their rights when invaded. Again, Mr. Sherman stated this, that it has nothing to do with the states or a military. The citizens have the exact same rights and privileges as the states do. Meaning, if a home gets invaded, you have the right to defend your person and your property, just as a state would have its right to defend against an invading force. Kind of like the southern border.
Damn!
So why the hell does all this matter? What is the point of the Second Amendment? How does this benefit us now today? So I've come up with 5 things that I think are essential, or points that are positive that we have the Second Amendment, why it is so essential for us today. So let's dive into those points one by one. Number 1, it protects us against tyrannical rule. It's easy to look back in history and see that governments, left by their own nature and their own will always turn towards tyranny. It has happened in every civilization. Look at Nazi Germany. Look at Venezuela when they took away the Second Amendment, or other countries when those rights were reduced. They always fell into some sort of tyrannical rule and pushing down the citizens in every way, because there was no check against military or political violence perpetrated by the government. Thomas Jefferson said this: when government fears the people, there is liberty. When people fear the government, there is tyranny. How true is that statement? We see examples of that now in modernity, that yes, that exists and has existed. And honestly, left to its own design, government will always lean towards tyranny without being checked. If there's nothing to stop the tyrannical leanings of a government, they're going to push that way. George Mason, another founding father, said this: to disarm the people is the most effectual way to enslave them. It's true. Again, we see these examples. Venezuela, recently, Venezuela taking away the rights of the people to defend themselves, taking all the guns away. What happens? It turns violent and it turns tyrannical. Nazi Germany, the same thing. They took away the guns for their safety, and then all of a sudden what happens? Yeah, socialism and statism comes in and destroys the rights of those people. Number 2 on the list of why the Second Amendment is still relevant and important to us now is self-defense. The Second Amendment grants you the right, the God-given right, to be able to, actually it doesn't grant you rights, it ensures the right that God has already given you for self-defense. The Supreme Court ruled back in, let me look when this is, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez in 2005, that the police have no obligation to save you. They have no obligation to respond. Now, luckily, we do have men and women in blue that are willing to show up and help, sometimes a little too much, granted. But they have no right. There's no obligation, there's no obligation for police to protect you. The Second Amendment allows you, a citizen in a republic, to keep and bear arms to use in self-defense, to defend yourself, your property, or your loved ones, or others. That exists because of the Second Amendment. So the third reason why the Second Amendment is so important for us today is it defends all of our other rights. Even though it's the second on the list, it protects our First Amendment. We can assemble, we can petition the government, we can worship how we may. It protects us from unlawful searches and seizures. It really fortifies all the other rights declared in the Bill of Rights. It's so essential for each one of us to understand this. Even though it's number 2, it defends all of those rights granted to us in the Bill of Rights. Number 4 on the list of why we need it, or why it's so important, is it deters threats from an invading force. I think it was it Japan that said that they will never invade the United States? This was back in World War II, because there's a rifle behind every blade of grass. I'm sure I botched the quote, but that's essentially what was given. And that's true. In the United States right now, there's almost 500 million firearms privately owned. That's more than most militaries outside of the United States. The citizens, just as a civilian force itself, a fighting force, has a pretty substantial force multiplier, if you will. It's very important. And number 5 on this list, and this is what I think a lot of countries don't understand, because it's not part of their ethos, their beginning, is it's really just embedded about, and it's fundamental to American individualism. It is more than just part of our culture. It is who Americans are. Being able to establish the right to defend ourselves from a government is something that's really not understood throughout the world. It's misunderstood more than anything. A lot of other governments and countries say, well, it's too dangerous in the United States because you get shot all the time. That doesn't happen. It's a farce. A lot of other countries truly misunderstand what makes America America. And part of that is because our will to fight and the Second Amendment that helps us defend that the rights that we are granted by God. You still think America is too violent because the proliferation of firearms in every home of the United States? Well, let's dive into what happens if you don't have that right anymore. I've already mentioned these, but I want to dive into them a little bit deeper. First of all, first one that comes to mind, because Australia is close to my heart. I love Australia. I lived there for a couple of years. In 1996, they had a horrible tragedy. The Hobart shooting. Horrible, right? Well, as a reaction, because they don't have that right, they had a privilege of owning guns, the government came in and bought back all of the guns, save a few in Australia. You can still own a gun in Australia. It's just really difficult. So they confiscated a bunch of guns in hopes that it would curb any kind of shooting. Now, if you do a little searching, you'll understand or see that it didn't really stop mass shootings in Australia. And it definitely didn't curb the violence. What they did see, however, was a rise in home invasions, because the bad guys knew that the homeowners had no way to really defend themselves. Now let's jump to Venezuela. Again, this is fairly recent, 2012. They created the same thing. They were worried about their gun violence because they don't understand it has nothing to do with the gun and everything to do with violence. They confiscated guns. They created a gun ban, thinking that it would drop the murder rate and the violence rate in Venezuela. Well, what happened? First of all, the government swooped in and became very authoritative And now Venezuela is one of the most violent countries in South America. Very high death rates. It's not safe. Not because the guns are gone. Well, it is because the guns are gone. But they didn't have the effect that was given. Right? Just because you take away a tool that can be used for violence, that doesn't stop the violence. In fact, when you take away somebody's right to defend themselves, the violence increases. Bad people will do bad things no matter what. Now let's talk about Nazi Germany. Germany has another special place in my heart. My dad is German. He was born in Berlin. So I understand what the impact, even though my dad was born after the war, the impact that the Nazi regime had on the people there was lasting for generations. So the hatred of the Jews, and to keep them safe, right, the Nazi regime came in and disarmed the people. Well, what did we see? We saw internment camps, which eventually led to the Holocaust, because the Jews had no way to keep themselves safe from a very tyrannical and socialist government that was hell-bent on destroying a group of people. Here's the thing about gun control. It offsets or attacks minorities at a greater proportionality than it does normal or other societies, right? I shouldn't say normal, that's not fair. But it attacks the minority class much greater than it does the middle class, or especially the upper class. So out of those three examples, we see that there's a pattern, and it's a very clear pattern, that when you disarm a populace, they're easier to control, they're easier to manipulate, and it always leads to some level of violence because the government has no check against it. The people cannot say, nope, we're not doing that, because the government has all the guns, and the people are left disarmed and helpless. It reminds me of this Benjamin Franklin quote that I had to dig up. He said this, quote, "They that give up essential liberty to obtain a little bit of temporary safety deserve neither liberty or safety." I would rather deal with violent freedom than peaceful safety. I know I botched that quote up too, but you know what I'm saying. Let's talk for just a second about the Supreme Court and modern gun control schemes. Now, thankfully, the court has seen fit to help define what was meant by the Founding Fathers and given us some guidelines and given us the way to defend our rights. And even though it might be minuscule in some aspects, it gives us a way to leverage the freedom back to the people and the power away from the government, the way our Founding Fathers designed. In the Heller decision of 2008, it reinstated that the Second Amendment is an individual right and not the right of the government or a military force. It truly belongs to the people, as it is in the Prefatory Clause. In 2022, the Bruin ruling struck down a lot of the unconstitutional and illegal carry laws restricting citizens from exercising their Second Amendment rights. Now, there still is a lot of fighting to do. There still is a lot of problems going on, especially in these highly gun control active states, that the Supreme Court is going to be ruling on these even more in depth. But we do know, because of Heller and Bruin and Caetano and others, honestly, that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the term shall means exactly what it means. You shall not infringe upon these rights. Even though a lot of states keep pushing and pushing at the behest of a lot of these anti-gun groups, we are winning little by little, which is important to understand. And it's important for you as a free citizen who enjoys your Second Amendment rights. It's important for you to understand how these rulings work in your favor. What it really boils down to in the end is that the fight to retain our Second Amendment is going to keep just going on, probably in perpetuity, forever. It's going to be a never-ending fight. And that's why it's so important for us as 2A minded people, as freedom minded people, because honestly, you don't have to be pro-gun to be pro-Second Amendment. It's important to understand that that is an integral part of our freedom. So what do we do as citizens? We need to stay informed. We need to be involved as much as we can in the community. Even if we don't own a gun, we should be as involved in the Second Amendment community and support of the Second Amendment as we are in the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment or the 14th Amendment. All of these are important for our freedoms. The Second Amendment is not about sport shooting. It is not about hunting. It is about your individual right to keep you and your family safe from harm, whether that be from a violent criminal or a tyrannical government. Now, there are benefits that come with the Second Amendment, like sport shooting, like hunting, like other recreational activities that can be done with guns, whatever they may be, even content creation, for crying out loud. Those rights are afforded to us by God and granted by the Constitution. Well, maybe granted by God and afforded by the Constitution. You decide. Either way, the government has no right, no ability, no control over that right, even though they consistently try to take that away from you. That should be a huge red flag for you when you see how much a government is willing to take away your rights that they did not give you. They're not privileges, they are rights. Governments give privileges, God gives rights. So again, stay involved, be vigorously involved, invite others into the 2A family, because it really is a family. Make sure that you exercise your right as frequent as possible, and don't be shy. I don't know, that's one thing that a lot of people are really concerned about, is they're too afraid what other people might think if they own guns. Are you worried about what people think when you read a magazine or look at your phone or speak freely or maybe what you worship? Come on now. The Second Amendment is important, and it should be something if you want to exercise. Again, it's not just about guns. Arms also includes knives or whatever might be in offense or defense. We mentioned that a while ago, right? Arms are anything that can be used in offense or defense. We need to understand that we are exercising our right when we carry a pocket knife or a coup-baton, or if we know how to use keys, or even our hands and feet. It's important for us to understand that right and what is afforded to us within that right. Anyway, that's my dive into the Second Amendment. I appreciate you guys hanging around and listen to me lecture about it. If you liked this content, please, the easiest way to support the channel, in the freest way to support this channel, is just by liking and sharing it with others. If you feel like giving some monetary support to the channel, which honestly would be greatly appreciated, you can jump to the website, rangemindedpodcast.com. There you can buy patches. There's also a link to the Patreon there, I think, on the website. There should be. If not, I'll link it in a link tree somewhere on the comments section somewhere. I greatly appreciate it. Hopefully you guys understand how important the Second Amendment is to me. I have a passion about it that I just enjoy sharing. That's why I do these podcasts. That's why I teach firearms classes, because I love the Second Amendment. I don't hate the other ones. I think they're all important. But the Second Amendment, like we mentioned earlier, protects all the others. And hopefully you guys see that and understand that. Anyways, you guys have an awesome day, afternoon, evening, whatever it is when you're watching this. Maybe you're watching it on the toilet, trying to avoid work. I don't know. It doesn't really matter to me. Whatever you do, do it safely. Don't forget, you have to take somebody shooting to help be good stewards of the Second Amendment. We need more flock into the fold, I guess you could say. And also, don't forget, you need to always stay range-minded. Peace out. Stay safe. Before we go, I wanted to read this quote from Thomas Jefferson because it is awesome. I love this quote. Check this out. A strong body makes the mind strong. As to the species of exercise, I advise the gun. While this gives moderate exercise to the body, It gives boldness, enterprise to the independence of the mind. Games played with the ball and others of that nature are too violent for the body and stamp no character on the mind. Let your gun, therefore, be your constant companion of your walks. Thanks, Thomas. See you guys. I want to insert this before I go. I know I already said goodbye and all that other stuff, but I think this is really, really important for you guys to hear and to understand and to get involved. As citizens, as good citizens of this country, it is imperative that we make our voices heard. Now, I know I did a video about this earlier today. It was a little bit, the audio sucked, right? Because I was at work, it was noisy, and I did not have this wonderful podcasting equipment. Your voices mean something. It's important to understand that, and it's important to be willing to make your voices heard as often as possible. Because remember, we're the boss. We're the ones that hire these people in Washington to do what we all can't be there to do ourselves. Okay, we are in charge. Now, Pam Bondi, if I can say her name right, she just received enough votes to become the Attorney General. Now, she is part of the deal that takes care of the ATF, right? She is now over the ATF, basically. Now, she has a person in mind that she wants to control the ATF. This person, I don't know who this person is. I've never met this person, but there's a lot of rumblings about this particular individual that is a very seasoned law enforcement officer. Why is that bad? Well, let's jump back to what the ATF has been doing compared to what it was designed to do in the beginning. Let's start at the beginning. The ATF was originally designed to impose a tax on a right to restrict people from buying machine guns, short-barreled rifles, short-barreled shotguns, that kind of thing. It was designed to be an imposition on a right, which is already, I think, BS, right? It went from a group that was supposed to enforce taxes to a group that was enforcing law under the Department of Justice, under the protection, if you will, of the Attorney General. This is a bad thing. This is a bad thing to have your rights regulated by a bureaucracy and not by Congress. Congress makes laws, not the ATF. We've discussed this ad nauseum in many, many other episodes. Now, as far as Bondi's idea of having this individual, a seasoned law enforcement officer, to take control of the ATF, why do I think that's a bad thing? Because the ATF is not a law enforcement agency. That's not what the original intent was of this bureaucracy, of this group of people, right? That's not the purpose. We have seen what happens when we have law enforcement professionals take control of the ATF. We've seen generations of issues. Now, I live in Idaho. One of the most proliferous and disgusting examples of what the ATF does when it overreaches its bounds is Ruby Ridge, right? That was awful, absolutely awful. People lost their lives because a rogue agency imposed its will on a free society. We just talked about the importance of the Second Amendment. A few years later, we saw what happened in Waco, Texas. Terrible, a tragedy. A lot of people died because an agency wanted to enforce the law that they created under the guidance, under the protection of the Department of Justice, not the laws that Congress set forth. This is what's dangerous about allowing a law enforcement professional, a seasoned law enforcement officer, taking control of the ATF. President Trump has had several names presented to him as possible directors of the ATF, right? We talked about Brandon Herrera a lot. Now, there's in the last episode we talked about maybe the pros and cons of getting rid of the ATF. I'm not sure if Brandon is the right guy. He's got a lot of experience inside the firearms community. He's an FFL holder. He's got his SOT with special operators tax. He can build firearms. He can build suppressors. He has his FFL to sell guns, buy and sell guns. So he's got a lot of experience on the professional side, not just the YouTuber side, which I know a lot of people don't like that about Brandon Herrera, and I get it. He comes across as really juvenile and as a character of something that a lot of people don't like. That is his YouTube persona. I have met with Brandon. I've talked with Brandon before. We're not tight. We're not homies by any means, but I've had a chance to talk to Brandon. He's a pretty cool guy. He's abrasive, yeah, but maybe that's what we need in the ATF. Right now, a guy named Marvin Richardson is the one that kind of took Stephen Dettelbach's space when Stephen Dettelbach left. Marvin Richardson is not a good individual to be in control of the ATF. He had his hands all over, not Ruby Ridge, but Waco, just like some of the others in this wonderful agency. They have their little fingerprints all over this stuff. ATF, the current administration and the leadership of the ATF has a really bad track record of protecting citizens. In fact, it does quite the opposite, as it seems, allegedly taking away the rights of people. One that I wouldn't mind seeing, either Brandon Herrera or another gentleman named Blake Masters, who had run for a seat in Arizona but lost. He has a lot of good pro-2A sentiments, and I know that puts the fear in a lot of people when it comes to the ATF and the uncertainty of what could happen to the agency. But what we don't want is somebody like David Chapman, who Biden tried to put in there, who was an awful person and who really did. I mean, he took a picture of himself, all happy Joe Lucky, at Waco. Pretty disgusting and not somebody we want leading the agency. But Brandon or Blake Masters, I mean, they really are good options. So I'm really concerned about who Pam Bondi has in mind. I don't know who it is. There's been a lot of rumblings about it. There's been some folks sharing with other YouTubers that have a way bigger influence than I do about who this individual is. People in the know, people inside of DC sharing this information. So I just wanted to make you guys completely aware of it. What can you do as a citizen? Great question. I'm glad you asked that. Just like I mentioned in my video that I posted earlier today, which happens to be the 5th of February, by the way. I think it's important that social media, like I said, is a big deal. So get on your social media, tag the real Donald Trump or at POTUS or whatever on Twitter or on Truth Social. Same thing with JD Vance. Tag him at JD Vance or at VP or whatever his, I don't know what the other Twitter handle is. And Pam Bondi, which is at Pam Bondi if you're on X. Make your voices heard. President Trump made a promise to gun owners. We need to make sure that we hold his feet to the fire and he keeps that promise. This is a big deal. We don't want the same as normal thing going on at the ATF. We're tired of that. There are unconstitutional laws that had taken effect all the way back starting in the 30s with the NFA, and then the AFA or whatever, NFA, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, that was a Biden moment. Oh, the thing. It's important that we get rid of this stuff. Let's get short-barreled rifles off the naughty list. Let's get suppressors off the naughty list. Let's restore the rights that our founding fathers saw necessary in the Second Amendment back to the people where it belongs. If Congress wants to make laws, that's how things must happen. Not an arbitrary agency that enforces its will or the will of whoever the acting director, like Attorney General, maybe, whatever will that person imposes on it. Another big red flag that I have with Pam Bondi is just that. When she was in Florida, she was all for red flag laws. President Trump was all for her mentioning about how important it was to bring red flag laws into existence. That is a major issue with a lot of us. That bypasses the Fourth Amendment. You can't just take something away from somebody without a warrant, without due process, and just say, well, we'll take away their stuff first, and then we'll worry about the court system. President Trump said something very similar to that. That's just kind of verbatim what he said. We cannot have that. President Trump, or anybody that in his staff that might actually by some weird way see this video, keep your promise. No, we do not want a long-term law enforcement officer in charge of the ATF. You have some great names in front of you that are involved, or from, rather, the firearms community that could actually make positive changes and actually bring common sense back into the ATF. Let's make that happen. And now I'll let you guys go. Peace out, stay safe, and stay range-minded. See ya.